My story is not easy to tell, but I ask you from my heart, please stay with me till the very end. Because what I went through was the hardest time of my life, and now that I share my journey here, this channel has become my only source of strength and income, so if you feel touched by my words, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and stay connected, because maybe my voice can become hope for someone else who feels trapped the way I once did. I was just 16 when my parents told me something that shook my entire world. They said my childhood was over. They said the time had come for me to get married, to leave behind school and friends and books and laughter, to step into a world of responsibility I never asked for. I still remember sitting in the small living room of our house when my father cleared his throat and told me there was a proposal, that a man much older than me was ready to make me his wife. My mother's eyes were wet, but she kept quiet because she, too, had been given away at a young age, and in her silence, I saw both her pain and her helplessness. My heart was racing, my hands were trembling. I wanted to scream that I was not ready, that I was still a child with dreams of studying, of seeing the world, of becoming something more than just a wife at 16, but the words froze inside me. I felt like a bird whose wings were being clipped before she ever got the chance to fly. I went to my room that night and cried until my pillow was soaked. I prayed for a miracle. I prayed that somehow I would not have to go through this. The days that followed were filled with conversations I was not part of, relatives coming in and out, my parents discussing dates and dowries, while I sat quietly like a shadow in the corner. Nobody asked me what I wanted. Nobody asked me if I was ready. I remember looking at my reflection in the mirror and thinking, how can they not see? I'm still just a girl. I tie my hair in braids. I laugh at silly jokes. I get excited over ice cream. How can they think I'm ready to be someone's wife? But in their eyes, I was no longer a child. I was a responsibility to be given away. In those days, every morning I would wake up with dread, my stomach in knots, wondering if today would be the day they told me it was final. My school bag lay untouched because they said there was no point in continuing. I was crushed because for me school was freedom. It was the only place I felt like myself. My teachers believed in me, my friends dreamed with me, and now all of it was slipping through my fingers. I remember one evening I sat with my best friend and told her everything. She grabbed my hands and said, "Don't let them take away your dreams. You have to fight," but how could I fight when the very people I loved most, my parents, were the ones pushing me into this? I was torn between love for them and love for myself. I knew they were not monsters. They thought they were doing what was best. In their eyes, marriage was security, protection, respect, but in my heart it felt like a cage. And every day I felt that cage closing in tighter. One night I gathered all my courage and went to my mother. I sat beside her while she sewed clothes under the dim light, and I whispered, "Mama, please don't make me do this. I am not ready. I want to finish my studies. I want to become something first." And her hands stopped sewing, tears welled in her eyes. She stroked my hair and said, "I know, my daughter. I know your pain, but I cannot fight your father." I felt a storm inside me, anger, sadness, hopelessness, but also a tiny spark of determination, because if my mother could not protect me, then maybe I had to find the courage to protect myself. The following week, something unexpected happened. My teacher visited our house because she had not seen me in class. She asked why I was absent. My father tried to brush it off, but I gathered all my strength and spoke the truth. I said, "Sir, they want me to get married. I want to study. I want to stay in school." My teacher's face turned pale. He looked at me and then at my parents. And in that moment, I felt both fear and relief. Fear because I knew I had broken my family's unspoken rule of silence. But relief because finally someone else knew the truth. The days after that were full of tension. My father scolded me. He said, "You embarrassed us." But deep down I felt proud because I had spoken. I finally used my voice, yet the pressure did not stop. Relatives whispered, neighbors judged, and my father grew colder, but something had changed in me. I was no longer the silent girl in the corner. I was beginning to realize that my future had to be mine to write, no matter how hard the road would be, and that realization gave me both strength and fear. Because standing up for myself meant standing against the people I loved most. And that was the most painful battle of all. Still, I knew I had to keep fighting. Because if I gave up, my dreams would die forever, and I could not let that happen. So let me ask you this. If you were in my place at just 16 and your parents wanted to end your childhood, would you stay silent or would you fight back? After that day when my teacher came to our house, everything in my world shifted. The air in my home became heavy with unspoken anger. My father avoided looking at me. My mother moved quietly as if she was walking on broken glass, and I felt like an intruder in my own family. Yet deep inside, there was a flicker of hope because at least someone outside had heard my voice. My teacher did not stop there. He called me to school one day and told me he had spoken to the headmaster. They wanted to help me. They wanted me to continue my studies. But the problem was my father's pride. He did not want outsiders telling him how to run his house, and so I was trapped between two worlds. One where my dreams were waiting and one where tradition was pulling me back. I remember nights when I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake by speaking out, wondering if it would only bring me more pain. But then I would think about the future, about the life that awaited me if I gave up. A life where I would be cooking in someone else's kitchen, carrying burdens I was not ready for, and losing the girl inside me who wanted to learn, to explore, to be free. And that thought terrified me even more than my father's anger, so I held on to my small courage. One day I overheard my father talking to a relative on the phone. He said, "We must move quickly before she changes her mind again." Before outsiders interfere, and my heart sank. It meant they were still planning my marriage in secret. I ran to my mother in panic. I begged her to stop this. I cried in her lap like a little child, and for the first time she broke down too. She said, "My daughter, I never wanted this life for you. I know your dreams, but in our family and our culture, my voice means nothing. Only your father decides." I hugged her tightly and felt her tears fall on my hair. And in that moment, I realized that my mother too was a prisoner of the same system. She had once been me, a girl with dreams, silenced and given away. And now she was passing on that chain unwillingly. And I felt a surge of determination, stronger than ever. I promised myself that this chain would end with me. It would not continue to my life, my children, my future. The next morning at school, my teacher asked if I was okay. I could not hold back my tears. I told him everything. And he said something that still echoes in my heart. He said, "You have a right to your life. Your voice matters. Do not let anyone steal it from you." His words gave me strength like armor, but I also feared the consequences. Because in my house, things were getting worse. My father shouted more. The pressure was unbearable. I started to feel isolated from my own family. Meals were eaten in silence. The walls of our home echoed with tension. And I felt like running away, but where could I go? I had no money, no place to hide, no relatives who would stand by me. All I had was my stubborn dream that refused to die. Then came the day that would change everything. A wedding date was fixed. My father announced it like a final judgment. I felt my knees go weak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vanish. But instead, I looked at him and said quietly, but firmly, "I will not do this." He froze. My relatives gasped. My mother covered her face. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. My father's eyes burned with rage. He shouted that I had shamed him, that I was no longer his daughter. His words cut me deeper than any knife, but my resolve did not break. I ran to my room, locked the door, and cried. Not because I was scared, but because I knew I had crossed a line that would change everything forever. Later that night, I heard my parents arguing. My mother's voice was trembling but strong. She said, "Let her live her life. She is not ready," and my father roared back. "She will do as I say." I curled up in bed shaking, but also proud that my mother had finally spoken. The next morning something happened I never imagined. My teacher and the headmaster came to our home again. They spoke calmly but firmly to my father. They told him I had talent, that I could achieve something great if given a chance. They said marrying me off at 16 would destroy not only my future but also my spirit. My father sat in silence, his jaw clenched, his pride wounded, and I watched him carefully. Praying he would listen, at first he dismissed them, but then I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Perhaps because deep inside he too knew that I was not ready. Perhaps because for the first time outsiders stood up to him after they left. He turned to me and said, "You have embarrassed me in front of everyone. But if you are so determined, then prove yourself, study, succeed. Show me that you are worth this fight." His words were not kind, but they were an opening. A small crack in the wall that had trapped me. And I grabbed it with both hands. From that day, I poured myself into my studies. Every book I opened was a step away from the cage they had built for me. Every page I read was a piece of freedom. But it was not easy. The relatives mocked. The neighbors whispered. Even in school, some students teased me, saying I was the girl who refused marriage, but I held my head high, because I knew that my battle was not only for me, it was for every girl who had been told she was too young to dream, for every voice silenced before it could sing. The nights were still hard, my father was still cold, but slowly I began to see small changes. My mother started smiling again. She began asking about my classes. My younger siblings looked at me with pride, and inside me a fire burned brighter than ever. Because I realized that courage is not about winning. It is about refusing to give up even when the world is against you, and that realization became my strength. Even when the road ahead was uncertain, even when fear still lived in my heart. I knew one thing for sure: I would never let anyone decide my life again. And with that promise to myself, I walked into the future. Still trembling, but stronger than I had ever been. So, I want to ask you, if your freedom came at the cost of standing against the people you love, would you have the strength to do it, or would you give in to keep the peace? When I look back now, I still remember the heaviness in those days. The way each sunrise felt like a battle, and each night carried the weight of tears I never wanted anyone to see. But as weeks turned into months, something inside me began to grow stronger. Not because life had suddenly become easier, but because I had made a choice to keep fighting. And every choice after that became a stepping stone. I threw myself into my studies. Not just to pass exams, but to prove that I was capable of something greater. I woke up before dawn to read. I stayed awake after everyone slept. My candle flickering in the darkness as I scribbled notes and solved problems. And each page of my notebooks felt like armor protecting me from the cage that had almost trapped me. I remember one evening when I stood on the stage of my school auditorium. My name had been called because I ranked first in my class. The applause echoed. And for the first time I saw my father standing in the crowd. His arms crossed, his face unreadable, and I wondered if he felt even a small spark of pride. I wanted him to see me not as a burden to be married off, but as his daughter who was capable of building her own life. That night at home, he didn't speak. But I noticed something different. His eyes softened when they met mine. And even though he didn't say the words, I felt that perhaps he was beginning to see me differently. Still, the journey was not without pain. Relatives continued to whisper, saying what kind of girl refuses marriage. Neighbors hinted that I was too bold, but I had learned to let their voices fade into the background. Because for me, the loudest voice was now my own. The voice that once trembled in fear now rose with strength. And I promised myself never again to silence it. Months later, an opportunity came that would change everything. My teacher encouraged me to apply for a scholarship. A chance to study further, to step beyond the walls of our small town. At first, the idea terrified me. It meant leaving home, leaving my family, leaving even the fragile peace that had started to return. But it also meant freedom, growth, the life I had dreamed of. When I told my father about it, he stared at me for a long time. His silence heavy. Then he said, "If you truly believe this is your path, go and show the world who you are." I was stunned. It was not an embrace. Not words of love, but it was permission. And for a girl who once thought her story had already been written, that permission was a key turning in the lock of my cage. I held that scholarship letter in my hands and cried, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I realized how far I had come. From the girl whose tears soaked her pillow in silence to the girl who dared to dream out loud. My mother hugged me tightly and whispered, "You are living the life I once wished for. Go, my daughter, go and make it real." And in her words, I heard both her sorrow and her pride. As I left home to begin my studies in a new city, I carried with me not just books and clothes, but the weight of every girl who had ever been told she was too young to choose her life. I wanted to be more than just a survivor of my own story. I wanted to be a voice for others. I started writing, sharing my journey, posting my story in small ways online, and little by little people began to listen. Messages came from girls in faraway places who said, "Your story is my story. You gave me hope." And in those words, I found my true calling. I realized that even though my battle was painful, it had given me a purpose, and that purpose was to speak, to tell, to remind others that no matter how heavy the chains, they can be broken. Today, I sit here speaking to you not as the girl who was forced, but as the woman who chose. I share my story because it has become my way of healing and also my way of living. This channel you're watching now is not just about me. It is about every silent girl who wishes someone would understand. It is also my only source of income, so when you like, subscribe, and share, you are not only supporting me, but also keeping alive a voice that once almost disappeared. And maybe together we can create a space where no 16-year-old has to cry alone in her room, wondering if her life is already over. When I remember the night my father tried to announce my marriage, I no longer feel the same helplessness. I feel strength. Because I know that if I had stayed silent, my future would have been stolen. And I'm proud that even with fear in my heart, I chose to fight. Sometimes people ask me if I forgive my parents. And the answer is complicated. I love them. I know they thought they were protecting me in their way. But I also know that love without freedom is not love at all. I hope one day they will see me not as a girl who defied them, but as a daughter who survived and grew stronger. I know my story is not the end, it is only the beginning. And there are still challenges ahead, but I face them with courage now. Courage that was born out of pain, courage that was shaped in tears, courage that I will carry into everything I do. And as I share this with you, I want you to know that your voice too matters. Maybe you are watching this and feeling stuck in your own life. Maybe your cage looks different than mine. But I promise you this, you are stronger than you think. And sometimes all it takes is speaking once, standing once, refusing once to change the course of your life forever. And that is why I share my journey, not just to tell what happened, but to remind you that hope is real. Change is possible, and your tomorrow does not have to look like your yesterday. Thank you for staying with me till the end. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for being part of my healing. And remember, every like and subscribe helps me continue telling these stories that matter. So let me ask you one final thing. If life tried to write your story for you, would you have the courage to take the pen back and write it yourself?